You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Let's get started. So welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented as always by Mile High Huddle and powered by Overtime Media. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, as always, my partner in crime. You know him. You love him. He is my fellow football priest. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, we were kind of not necessarily expecting to hear any big news today in terms of a resolution on the GM search, but maybe just some steps in that direction. And while there wasn't anything super definitive, I think your story that you wrote at milehighhuddle.com was the closest thing to definitive as we could get today based on the rumblings and the news and the rumors. So it seems to be George Paton is the leader in the clubhouse, I guess.
Yeah, Mike Kliss reported that the Vikings assistant GM, George Paton, remains the candidate to beat in a three-man race, and this is after the Patriots assistant director of player personnel, Dave Ziegler, pulled out of the race. So it's coming down right now to George Paton, Champ Kelly, and Terry Fontenot. And the latest rumblings indicate that Fontenot is actually a front runner now, the favorite in Atlanta to take their GM job. And the rumor goes he'd be a package deal with Joe Brady, the Panthers OC. So Brady as the head coach, and you have Fontenot as the GM in Atlanta. That's a great pairing for them. I can see why Atlanta is the front runner for Fontenot services. But if they can get George Paton Denver, Chad, that's just as good, if not arguably better, the case you can make for him. The reality is setting in that very, very soon, the next 24 to 48 hours, Terry Fontenot or George Paton could be the next Broncos general manager, could be Elway's replacement. Wild times, exciting times.
I think on the surface, you look at resumes, you look at the dues guys have paid and whatnot. I think George Paton emerges as the most qualified candidate, right? Just based on resume. But for me, it's still Terry Fontenot number one, because I want that kind of younger juice. You know, not only that, that's not the primary reason, because if you look at the Vikings roster over the last few years and you look at the Saints roster, you got to give the edge to the Saints in terms of its depth of talent. I mean, just across the board. But, you know, I just want a guy that's young, that's plugged into, you know, the trends and the cutting edge of the NFL. And that's not to say that Paton is not plugged in or wouldn't be, because, again, I think he would be. If the hire ultimately ends up being George Paton, I still think it would be a really good decision for this team, and some new blood and a fresh outside perspective, new eyes coming in and, you know, and taking over the reins here. But, Zack, I'm still pining for, I'm still holding out hope that it's going to be Terry Fontenot. I mean, he's just a really exciting young up-and-comer, and if the Broncos don't make him the GM, someone will, and as you said, it's probably going to be the Falcons.
Yeah, and I have to admire what Atlanta's looking to do here. They're going and looking to pair one of the best veteran talent evaluators in the NFL in Terry Fontenot with one of the best young up-and-coming offensive minds in Joe Brady. That is how it's done. And looking on it from Fontenot's point of view, not only in Atlanta or any other opening like Detroit, he would get to pick his next head coach. He wouldn't have that say in Denver. He would get to stick it to his previous employer, the Saints, twice a year in the NFC South. So I'm assuming, for the sake right now, at 6:26 Mountain Time on Monday, January 11th, that Fontenot is going to Atlanta. He is my favorite candidate for Denver. I'm being realistic, though. I think it's Paton right now, Chad. And again, if they can get him, this is a guy who's been a hot commodity for years now. He's declined to leave Minnesota for years. He's worked aside Rick Spielman and won division titles. He sent dozens of players to the Pro Bowl. This guy has his hand in every facet of management in the front office, the draft, free agency, scouting, advanced analytics, game planning. He's literally a do-it-all kind of guy. He wears multiple hats. He would help transform this Broncos front office and this Broncos team, I believe, in one offseason. He's that good.
I was listening to a conversation that included Mike Kliss today, and he kind of shed some light on, at least a little bit anyway, on how some of these interviews shook out in terms of some of the questions that were asked. Of course, he didn't name names, but when it came down to the question of the quarterback position, right, that's going to be, you know, next to I mean, for most fans, it's probably above in terms of priority, quarterback, Von Miller, take your pick in terms of what fans are going to care the most about once this GM gets hired in terms of the decision point. To me, it's quarterback, because all the Von Millers in the world, if you don't got the quarterback, you're still dead in the water. The last 4+ years have proven that. And one thing that Kliss brought up is that, you take away Dave Ziegler, who, of course, bowed out on Sunday to stick with the Patriots. And by the way, Nick Caserio got paid, dude. That dude's brought in $5 to $6 million a year. $30 million contract is the rumblings, but I digress. These three, so we're counting Paton, we're counting Fontenot, we're counting Kelly. They were each asked what their view is basically on the quarterback position for the Broncos, as is, right? Only one of them, we don't know which, so I'm going to pose a question to you. Only one of them said, hey, the Broncos have gone this far developing and putting time and TLC into Drew Lock. Broncos need to see it through. The other one said, you need to get a top 10 quarterback at any means possible, whether it's the draft, trade market, whatever. And another said, hey, go out. Probably the best thing to do, get a veteran to come in here and bring some stability to the offense. In your mind's eye, Zach, knowing what we do know about these candidates, we've got to know them, a lot more just over the last, in terms of our research as writers and journalists. But we still don't know a whole heck of a lot about these guys in terms of their personality, so it's still guesswork. But who do you think said stay the course with Drew Lock, if you had to guess?
I would have to assume, among the three, it's not Kelly, because he went out and got Nick Foles, so he was the one, and this is all speculation, but he was the one, I think, pining for a veteran. I have to believe, based on the way he's developed that roster down there in New Orleans, the fact that he wanted to stay the course, to me, it speaks to Fontenot. He knows what it takes in the NFL because he's seen it over the course of many years, not just in the Saints front office, but his other positions as well. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but Peyton, they went out and got Kirk Cousins to a big contract and then re-up with him. So I would tend to think the guy who'd want to stay the course. They drafted Taysom Hill when they had Drew Brees. They like to draft more players than they sign in free agency. They use the free agent period as a cherry on top, and they use the draft correctly as the foundation to build the house. Free agency is just a chimney you put on top of the house. So I like to think that Fontenot in New Orleans, he knows how to build a roster and also preach patience at the most important position in all of the land.
I would guess, if a little fly on the wall could come and give me the answer, my guess would be that it was Champ Kelly who said stick it out with Drew. And the reason I say that's just my guess, is because of his past ties to the Broncos front office and kind of the investment in terms of, even though he left Denver long before Drew was even on the radar. He left, 2014, I want to say? No, 2015. He joined Chicago the same time Foxy and Vic Fangio did in 2015. But for some reason, my gut's telling me Kelly. But it's an interesting question to ponder, right? Because each one of these guys had a different perspective. And, of course, whatever that perspective was, is probably going to play a big role in terms of informing the hiring committee, which includes John Elway, Joe Ellis, Vic Fangio, and Chief Communications Officer, the PR czar, Patrick Smythe. So it's going to be interesting to see that.
Yeah, and we could be wrong. You could definitely be right. I can be wrong with that. We won't really know, though. I'd like to believe that if the Broncos are narrowing this down, all these three candidates have one commonality in mind. And that's what they can do for the best interest of the Broncos now and going forward. So I think Elway being part of that committee and Fangio being the head coach and wanting continuity, at least, front-facing that publicly, I believe the candidates would be telling him something they'd want to hear when it comes to Drew Lock. They're not going to say, I'm going to come in the building and trade 5 number 1 picks for Deshaun Watson. That wouldn't get him the job. But if you come in and say, listen, I believe in Drew Lock, or I think we can salvage Lock or take him to a new level, that would be more endearing to that hiring committee. And it's also common sense. It's a young quarterback who showed well in the finale. Why would you jump ship on him for an unknown quantity, whether it's a veteran or a rookie?
Significant improvement from Drew Lock down the stretch, but unfortunately, it was too little too late. So from perspectives on the outside looking in, which these three candidates, they're all outside hires, it's going to be really interesting to see, because I'm sure we'll know the answer at some point in the very near future based on who the hire is. But gang, we got a lot more to get to. We'll see what's on your mind in the chat. I see we got a few super chats stacked up there, Zach. But first, handle these matters of business, starting with tonight's live stream sponsor.
Yes, tonight's live stream podcast is brought to you by sportsbetting.com. Broncos country. Gambling is now legal in the state of Colorado, as you well know, and you're looking to make watching your favorite sports a little more interesting. Sportsbetting.com is your no-brainer destination just for that. Here's why. Sharp odds and low juice. They have in-house bookmakers. They're not a third-party service or provider of odds. They have reduced juice and the best prices you will find on the open market. Also, hassle-free bonuses, a one-time rollover, which means the bonus money is yours after you bet it just one time. Whereas other sites and competitors make you range from 5 to 30 times to bet that money and unlock your bonus winnings, not at sportsbetting.com. Also, 24/7 live customer support. When you contact sportsbetting.com, you are always getting a real person in the U.S. that you can chat with, never a robot, always someone in the good old U.S. of A. But here's the kicker. Right now, after you make your very first deposit, sportsbetting.com will match it up to $750. That's $750 in free bet credits, guys. Plus, right now with the NBA season in full swing, you also get $25 in free bet credits. So head on over to sportsbetting.com/milehighhuddle. That's sportsbetting.com/milehighhuddle and capitalize on up to $750 in free bet credits and start 2021 off on the right foot.
All right, guys, a couple other quick things. We'll dive right into the content and your questions. Just a quick reminder, follow the podcast on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. And by the way, guys, if you see me, my eyes look up a little bit here. I'm just keeping an eye on the national championship game. But follow the podcast on Twitter at HuddleUpPod, the main account at Mile High Huddle, my partner Zack Kelberman at Kelberman NFL, myself at Chad and Jensen. Also, gang, head on over to HuddleUpPod.com and get your swag on. It's another way to support what we're doing here at MHH. Get yourself a hat, get yourself a T-shirt. We've got polos, we've got hoodies, we've got mugs. There's a little something for everybody. And again, it's another way to support what we're doing here. And so many of you have, and we are just grateful. And we pinch ourselves every day at the great community that we really do have here at MHH. Also, Zach, we received a complete, outpouring of fans reaching out and listeners saying, how do we get in on Kelberman's Corner? How do we become official Facebook supporters? And, we try to spell it out when we're on these live pods, letting everybody know how to do it. But I'm just really quick, just for the sake of posterity and being as specific as possible. You just go to facebook.com/milehighhuddle. That's our page. All right. As you can see here, this is what it looks like. All right. If you scroll down, there's a big blue button. In fact, let me do this. I gotta switch this to what it looks like. This is what it looks like for you. If you go there, you see the big blue button that says become a supporter. You click that. You are in like Flynn. Okay. And then you'll have access to not only Kelberman's Corner each and every Sunday, but we're going to be feeding and producing more content uniquely tailored to our Facebook supporting community. So check that out if you're in a position to. And if you're not, it's all good, gang. We're just seriously so happy to have you with us in the live stream, or if you're listening after the fact as an on-demand podcast. But we do humbly ask, all right, that you subscribe first and foremost, whether that's YouTube, Apple Pod, wherever you listen, make sure you're subscribed, click the notifications. Number 2, like this video, crucial on YouTube, crucial on Facebook. And then the last one, number 3, is the litmus test. If we are doing a good job for you, listen, sometimes we might disagree. We might not have the same view on certain topics, this and that. But if you think we're doing a good job, if this is content worthy of your time, share this thing out there, help us continue to grow and reach new like-minded Broncos fans just like you.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Zach, I see we have quite a few stacked up here, but I just want to grab this one before the chat jumps. And it's an interesting one from Darab Qureshi. Apologies if I butchered the pronunciation, my friend. But he says on YouTube, if we don't draft or trade up for a QB this year, what are the chances we'll get another opportunity? The GM needs to decide how quickly Drew Lock can be the guy or move on from him and Pat Shurmur. Your thoughts, Zach?
Man, you know what just occurred to me? It's kind of a crappy situation. The new GM, whoever it may be, they're walking into a scenario where the coaching staff has retained the head coach and also the coordinators. So he can't replace Fangio. Let's just say it's George Paton. He can't replace Fangio. He can't replace Pat Shurmur. He's stuck in purgatory or incumbency for at least this season. But in terms of answering the question, you have to roll with what you're going what you're building on from last year. And I think what we touched on before we went to our break for the ad was that any GM coming in would want to adhere to what the Broncos want to do. They want to give Locke the first chance to get, to hold on to that mantle as the quarterback of the future. They want to give him a chance, one more chance, an unfettered chance to become that guy, to build on what he did in the season finale, or to prove once and for all he is not the guy. So my inclination is, without knowing the new GM, with it being January still, he's going to get the first dibs. But, that's why you always have to have a safeguard. That's why I'm saying it's stupid to sign like a Mariota or acquire a Matt Stafford when if Locke is not the guy, fine, but at least have someone young that can also be up and coming, can also hit his prime, can also have some sort of ceiling. That's why I've been advocating make Locke the number one, but draft a guy maybe in the second or third round. Wouldn't be a high-priced, big-name guy, but it'd be a guy who would have some skills, some potential in a worst-case scenario where Locke bombs.
Listen, there's always going to be opportunities because if you make the wrong decision on the quarterback this year, because your implication here is if you don't strike now while you're in the top 10, who's to say you'll ever have such an opportunity in the future? Well, listen, if you choose Drew Lock this year, ostensibly because you chose not to draft a quarterback, and it doesn't work out, you're probably going to be in the top 10 again. So opportunity will knock at some point down the line. It's just, as Zach said, at this stage, we're kind of in a holding pattern until we know who the GM hire is. Our friend Jeremy, a.k.a. Black Knight, 232 jumping in. Appreciate you, bro. Good to see you. He says, am I the only one worried about the GM, whoever ends up being the hire, being a yes man to Elway? I think there's a lot of people that share those misgivings, including probably some of the candidates, to be frank with you, Jeremy. But this was something I wrote about today, Zach, in terms of John Elway gave a little one-on-one with Mike Kliss in written form. And in it, he admitted that he's tired. He's kind of grinded down and worn down by the enormity of what the job has been for 10 years, right? He's I don't know. I guess you could say he's an old man, right? He's north of 60. So if that doesn't qualify for being an old man, what does? But especially these last 5 years, he's tired. And Zach, the one thing he said though, that was interesting is really poor, cross signals, you get the wires crossed. He's not being as articulate on this subject as I think he should be, because this all gets thrown out there in the court of public opinion. And I think these GMs see it. He said, look, they're still going to report to me. The GM and Vic are going to, run this ship, so to speak, but they still report to me. And it just sends mixed signals. It's like, all right, we get it. In an executive hierarchy, the president's at the very top, then you've got, in the case of the National Football League, GM and then a head coach, depending on, how certain contracts are structured. But nevertheless, when you have to throw in that caveat, Zach, but they'll report to me, it just muddies the water instead of just saying, look, I'm here to be a sounding board. I'm here because this is what I think he meant to say, but he just didn't do a good job of articulating it enough to make it, unquestionable. Look, I'm here as a sounding board. You need me, input, advice. I'm here, but this is the new guy's gig.
Well, listen, a zebra can't change his stripes overnight. Elway has known nothing but consolidated power for the last decade. And actually, as a player as well, he ran Denver when he was a quarterback. He had input into personnel moves, and he was among that stature. I also read something really interesting. Anyone after the podcast, of course, Elway gave an interview with Peter King for the MMQB. He puts it out every Monday. He said the same two words you said, or that Elway said to Kliss, I'm tired. And Peter King ended that little it was a little paragraph. Great little window into Elway's thinking. He said, this is for real. This was King's opinion on the situation. This is legit. It's not a yes man. This isn't a puppet show. Elway really is backing out of the limelight. Gone next year, and the new GM is the new GM, not just in title, but in power as well.
Here's an interesting question, a super chat from our friend Chase Wellner. And by the way, gang, I am traveling today to visit some family, and so I'm in a hotel room. If by any means the Wi-Fi, Zach, if you notice anything, holler at me and let me know, and we'll see what we can do. But Chase says, Benjamin Albright thinks we could hire Peyton and Kelly. Listen, that kind of echoes something that Kliss said today in that same conversation I mentioned that I listened to, and that is that his read, based on what the guys he's talked to in the front office, Kliss is as plugged in as anyone in the NFL when it comes to Broncos HQ. his read is that the Broncos like Champ Kelly, but they like him as the number 2, meaning the implication then being it's Paton or Fontenot as the number 1. So that's something Kliss is kind of putting out there on the airwaves. It sounds like Benjamin Albright, which I haven't seen, is kind of echoing that. Which you and I, Zach, we talked about this right before we went live, the notion that, hey, Champ Kelly, they interviewed him, they like him, but maybe they're not quite ready to give him the reins. What would be your thoughts on can you imagine a Terry Fontenot, Champ Kelly, duo regime in the front office? I mean, talk about an infusion of youth and juice.
Well, I mean, look at if you stack up Kelly versus Fontenot or George Paton, it's like 2 are really high qualified candidates, and one is just not there yet, Chad. George Paton's been an assistant GM, and Fontenot's had his hand in every part of the Saints organization. Champ Kelly's only in his, coming out of his 3rd season with them now in his current role. So he's still pretty young. And I see why Elway might be, or at least the Broncos might be apprehensive about making him the number 1. I wouldn't mind it. It would make the Broncos obviously a better team getting 2 of those candidates. It reminds me of the Broncos hiring Fangio and also hiring Munchak to work under him. It's the same kind of situation. I wouldn't mind it, but I almost want Paton to be the one in charge of scouting. If that's what I'm hiring for, talent acquisition, I wouldn't want maybe Kelly necessarily overlapping him or overruling him. I would want George Paton to be the one to make the call. But in terms of roster building, chemistry building, personality, in terms of being a player's executive, there's no downside to pairing Fontenot or George Paton with Champ Kelly.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Very, very interesting prospect. We'll see how that shakes out. Our friend Dennis Woods, one of the superstars, jumping in on Super Chat. Appreciate you, my friend. He says, just want to show some love and appreciation. Denver Broncos for life. # state of being from blank. But we all know where this cat is from. Michigan. Y'all, good to see you, my friend. Appreciate you, Dennis. We also got Antonio Aragon jumping in. Good to see you as well, my friend. He says, happy to catch the pod. Do you guys think Locke takes a major leap next year if given the chance? # Broncos country. I think I'm inclined, as I've been saying for the last couple of months now, guys. I'm inclined to give Locke year 3 as the guy for a reason. I think that he's really close to unlocking the equation. It's like in Good Will Hunting, right? The guy, the professor has the equation up on the blackboard, and all the students walk by. No one can solve it, and then one day, Goodwill or Will Hunting walks in, solves the thing, and the whole thing unlocks and everything. That's how close Drew Lock is. He's this close to being Will Hunting, but in my opinion, but he's got to be given the opportunity to actually put it into practice and finish what he and the Broncos started. It's just unclear at this point whether or not he's going to be given that shot, because Zach, John Elway, I think in his heart of hearts wants to give that to Drew Lock, but at the same time, if he's given over the reins, he's giving over the reins. And in that sense, you can't control how one of these guys might ultimately view Locke and the quarterback position and how to prioritize that.
I like that analogy a lot with Good Will Hunting. That was pretty clever. In terms of Locke, though, I mean, it's the same old story. It's going to sound like a bunch of excuse making or him needing a perfect situation to succeed, like some quarterbacks like Jared Goff, for example. But, if he doesn't have injuries to his best players like Courtland Sutton, if he's given a normal offseason, if his coaching staff works with him and calls the best plays for him, he has the talent. And also on Locke, not also to remove himself from blame, if he takes a step forward, if he becomes more accurate, if he works on his mechanics, if he removes the hero ball from his game, then yes. We don't know it can be the year of Drew Lock necessarily, like we were predicting, but the next step forward, 3,500, 4,000 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 12 picks. The Broncos are a 10-win team, absolutely within reason, and especially, Chad, if you have the right man in the building who would allow him to cook, as they would say in Seattle.
Amen. Burn the guitarist jumping in. Good to see you, my friend, a guy that's become increasingly more of a player on Super Chat. So it's great to have you. We've really enjoyed your contributions to the community and the conversation, my friend. So keep it up. He says, hey guys, I thought we agreed that Elway and the roster wasn't really the problem in 2020. Do you think a new GM will really be that transformative? Yeah. I mean, in terms of what took place on the field, right, from week 1 to week 17, I think Elway did about as good a job as you could expect him to do in terms of, the pieces that were put in place. He coming off the heels of 3 really successful, in my opinion, drafts. Made a few free agent moves, mostly on the trade market that we all expected to pan out because we knew Bouye was Vic Fangio's dream corner, dating all the way back to 2017. Jarrell Casey was coming off a 5th straight Pro Bowl. You bring in Melvin Gordon, who Zach and I, we were not high on that signing, but he ended up out kicking his coverage in terms of what we expected to see. All those pieces were put in place, but then there were so many weird mitigating factors that the season just went off the rails. But because it's coming on year 5 of a 5-year post Super Bowl 50 playoff drought, it all gets tangled up into one big thing. So 2020, Zach, ends up getting kind of saddled with the failures of the previous 4 years. Call it fair or not, but that's just the way the cookie crumbled. And so for Elway, again, I think this was something that Joe Ellis saw the writing on the wall. And at whatever point, I want to say it was probably the KC game in the snow again this year down the stretch, and said, hey, man, doesn't look like this thing's going to go our way. Here's an idea. You thought about maybe let's hire someone to run GM. And you step back and just kind of be the figurehead president role. And John Elway, this is just based on what the Broncos have told us, not necessarily how I view this. This is what the Broncos said happened. John Elway mulled that over and said, yeah, the time is right. But Zach, a new GM, what can he really do coming in here if Elway had done a good enough job that, it wasn't his fault the way things went? I mean, I think just a new vision, something different, a change, not change for just the sake of change, but bringing in a guy that has a legit resume and is a force to be reckoned with. That's what the Broncos need right now.
2020 wasn't Elway's fault, and in certain areas it was Elway's fault. For the most part, it wasn't. It was way more on coaching, Chad, and the personnel. The quarterbacking or injuries or the pandemic. It was mostly on the coaching than it was what Elway did. I thought he made amazing moves, and I was lauding him as an offseason up there with 2014. We all revered that offseason with all the acquisitions they made, but getting Jarrell Casey for a 7th rounder, getting Bouye for a mid-round pick, and going all in on your young quarterback, drafting 2 receivers. I thought Elway had a great offseason, but this is where it was his fault as well, though. He front-loaded the roster. He left the Broncos bare in certain areas, right tackle, inside linebacker, cornerback. That's where I would want a new guy in the building that has that eye, that can find those players in every draft class. When you can find Alvin Kamara at the 67th overall pick, whatever he was, I want that guy. So if Bryce Callahan goes down, they have another 2-3 cornerbacks that step up, Chad, and just become stars in the making. I want a dynamic inside linebacker. I want new blood in the building that has that vision. Elway, just whatever reason, maybe it was ego, pride, he didn't see it, inability, incompetency, whatever it may be. There were certain areas where Elway as GM, not just this season, but right tackle for how many years now has been a problem for Denver, even giving Juwan James that contract. Maybe the next GM wouldn't leave the Broncos so bare there. So 90% of the time, the reason for the Broncos being bad this year was not on Elway, but that 10% is where I feel like the new GM can improve upon.
I think Elway's biggest problem that really cursed him was his failures and straight up swinging and missing at the quarterback position. And with Drew Lock, you may have finally found the guy, but in terms of Elway's ultimate fate, it was too late in the game because Lock needed to go through his own trial and error learning curve, develop through a trial by fire, live bullet scenario. And the Broncos just were no longer in a position to afford him that when the stakes are your actual record in regular season games without it trickling down and affecting Elway's cachet and clout as a GM. So even though Drew Lock's kind of failure to launch in 2020 is not necessarily the entire book on Drew, he might end up coming back in 2021 and finally blowing the doors down, or he might come back and completely flame out. We don't know. But he ends up, similar to what I talked about in my last remark, he ends up kind of carrying the same stripes of Elway's previous failures at the quarterback position that include Paxton Lynch, the whole Brock Osweiler debacle when he originally left Denver, which led to Paxton Lynch, Chad Kelly and the embarrassment there, the swing and miss on Case Keenum, the swing and miss on Joe Flacco. It all just adds up to a point where, again, this is a quarterback-driven league, Zach. you got to have the QB. And I think Drew Lock could still be that guy, but it was too little too late in terms of Elway's fate.
Jesus, anyone else depressed right now? Rattling off those names, Chad, like what we've been through the last few years. I mean, the Broncos are due for just a dynamic franchise quarterback, Lock or somebody else. Man, wow.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Drew H., good to see you. Our friend Drew Hollenbeck, longtime listener, bona fide superstar. He's a Mount Rushmore superstar for us here at MHH.
Yes.
I mean, look at that profile pic. We love it. It brings a tear to mine eye. Good to see you, my friend, and we really appreciate that generosity.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, Drew.
Brother. He says, "What's up, guys? Been a minute. Fontenot is the perfect option in my eye. I don't like a lot of the moves Chicago and Minnesota have made the past few years, paying Cousins, drafting Trubisky. Yeah, we share a brain with you on that. But here's one thing that I had to kind of be reminded of, Zach, with regard to Champ Kelly's resume. He was given a lot of credit for that 2014 free agent class in Denver that landed Ware, Ward, Talib, and Emmanuel Sanders. He had a big role in that. He was given a lot of credit for kind of putting those pieces together and getting the stars to align the way it did. And then Elway comes in, and consummates the deal, closes it down, so to speak. So even though the whole Trubisky thing is a huge red flag, Champ Kelly does have some successes, but I'm with Drew. My guy remains Terry Fontenot, with George Paton as just a very close second.
But here's the thing. No one remembers Champ Kelly for what he did in Denver. Everyone associates him with passing on, or maybe it's some sort of false misconception that he was the one who signed off on it, but he was among the contingent that didn't place one pre-draft phone call or interview with Deshaun Watson. Just like they don't remember Elway, Chad, for that 2014 free agent class. People outside of Denver anyway, they all remember him and associate him with the bad quarterbacks that followed him that you just rattled off. So if it boils down to it, I believe the Broncos' internal thinking, if what Cliff said is true, matches mine completely. Champ Kelly has, he's a qualified candidate. He's a really good guy, overcome a lot, personable, good with players, but his resume doesn't hold a candle to someone like Terry Fontenot. The roster he's assembled, Chad, what he's done in New Orleans, even what George Paton has done in Minnesota. If you look at his bio on the Vikings website, the Pro Bowlers, the division titles, the roster turnover and all they've overcome and what he does on a weekly basis, not just finding players or scouting players, but handling some parts of the salary cap, handling game breakdowns, advanced scouting. He does it all. So that's why Fontenot especially is my number one. But realistically, I would not cry if George Paton was the guy either.
Plus, when you look at Peyton's resume, you're accomplishing all that in the same division where Aaron Rodgers has hung his hat, since becoming a starter in what was it, 2008, I think was his first year as a starter. So, yeah, it takes on a different, gleam. Savage Boy Kev on Twitch wants to know, do you guys stream on Sundays? This is my first off season watching the pod, so I don't know. All right, guys, we're going to drop some really complicated programming information on you, okay? Make sure you grab a pen. Make sure you grab a piece of paper. This one's going to be a little complicated, hard to remember.
There'll be a quiz tomorrow.
Every day, 7 days a week, Mile High Huddle streams a podcast, 6 o'clock Mountain to 7 o'clock Mountain, give or take a few minutes on both ends. So, my friend Kev, every day, my friend, every single day, including Sundays, even in the off season. Sundays is a Chad and Zach day. It's Huddle Up podcast. We go, Zach and I, we go Sunday, Monday. We're off Tuesday. We'll come back Wednesday, Thursday. Meanwhile, Building the Broncos is on Tuesday. Dove Valley Deep Divers on Friday, and Mile High Insiders on Saturday. So we're one big happy fam. Crudam, cool name, my friend. Appreciate you. It's a name we don't recognize, Zach, on Super Chat. So welcome and thank you, bro. Do you guys believe we should wait until pick 9 for an inside linebacker, or should we move up? I'm tired of tight ends shredding our defense. Maybe the second pick goes to defense as well at corner. Crudum YT on Twitter. All right, I'll try and find you, my friend. I appreciate you letting me know that because we like tagging our superstars after every single podcast. So I'll reach out and connect with you, my friend. But listen, you don't trade up for an inside linebacker unless it's, the second coming of Mike Singletary or freaking Ray Lewis or one of these guys maybe. But you don't have a crystal ball. You can't know that that's what a guy is going to be. So Now, look, if you're at pick 9, Zach and Micah Parsons ends up falling to 8, and you can tell that they don't want to take a linebacker there, and you want, or I don't know, that's not a very good example. But if he's within 1 or 2 picks of where you're at, maybe depending on the price you would consider it, but typically that's just not a position you give up very coveted, important draft capital to acquire.
Exactly, yeah. It's like trading up for a running back in round 1. You just don't do it in today's NFL, and I'm right there with you, Crudum. I've been pining for an inside linebacker for the last 4 years now. They cannot keep getting by with the Josie Jewels of the world starting there, but Chad's right. You're not going to sacrifice premium draft capital with a new GM to boot. I mean, this guy's going to want more opportunities to hit on draft picks, and he's going to want to probably stockpile capital and not get rid of it. If Parsons falls to 8, I'm having a conversation about trading up. But if you stay put, you're pretty much guaranteed to land a blue chip prospect, whether that's a Caleb Farley or whether that's a Zach Wilson. So my inclination is always in the top 10 is to stay put up until right about when you're on the clock, maybe 1 or 2 picks in advance, scout the board. If you don't have 100% conviction, you stay put and take the BPA.
You know, if the new GM comes in and does the post, the Elway post-mortem and says, look, I like Drew, but he's not the guy. He's not who I envision being able to carry the torch. If that's what your ultimate evaluation is, then you sell out to get the quarterback now. In terms of how a GM would think, you do whatever you can to get the quarterback. I still, even though we don't know yet who that GM is going to be, I still think the one parting kind of grip of Elway here is whoever this hire is coming in saying, hey, I'm not saying don't tinker with quarterback. My one request is, Drew, 1 more year. I think that's what's going to happen. So to get back to what Crudum said, to me, you hit the nail on the head, bro. Linebacker, corner, switch the order. I don't care, but those need to be the top priorities in rounds 1 and 2, in my opinion. And thank you, Christos. Duke Boynton, bona fide superstar. What is that? The spider? Like some big ass spider in your hand, dude? I don't know what that is. That's creepy, Doc. But it's good to see you.
Killing it with fire.
Love you, buddy. Good to see you. He says, follow Zach. Y'all won't be disappointed.
Duke.
Trust.
Too kind, man. Some of you will. Just a disclaimer, if you do follow me, I'm sure some of you will, but I appreciate you, Duke, as always. Super chat, superstar chat. Mount Rushmore. Thank you, Duke.
Oh, yeah. And a friend. I'm lucky to call him a friend, and we both are, but love you, Duke. Good to see you, bro. Boise Man in the house again. Boise Man, by the way, are you on Twitter? Because after last night's show, once again, I tried to find you, but I couldn't be sure. Let me know if you're on Twitter by reaching out, connect with me. I'll follow back. We like to be able to stay on top of all of our superstars. Follow them on Twitter, shout them out. But he says, and by the way, hope baby girl is doing well. Or actually, yeah, he said the baby girl was born. So again, congrats on that. Paton, I remember. See, Doc, I remember. If new GM comes in and wants a new quarterback, I'd rather take a shot on a new OC as well. Pat Shurmur is not the guy to mold a modern quarterback. Your thoughts, Zach?
Right there with you, Boise, man. If Locke goes, Shurmur has to go as well, because what's the point? Why would you keep an incumbent coordinator with a new quarterback? And if he failed with Locke, why would you want him to ruin another quarterback? So absolutely 1,000,000,000%. If Locke is not the answer, then Shurmur has to go as well. And Chad, what's unfortunate now is not only, Locke isn't just tied to Elway, Locke is tied to Pat Shurmur. And unfortunately for Locke, that might be his downfall. I don't think Shurmur is it. I just don't.
Zach, I don't know if you, on your end in the stream, if you see Kenneth's first super talking about Kubiak and Levi by chance. If not, I'll reverse engineer him, but I'll start here grabbing Cameron while you take a look.
Yeah, I can only go up to about that. That's the last super chat I have.
I'll reverse engineer him. Cameron Whitehead, good to see you, my friend. Again, reminder, if you're on Twitter, connect with us, my friend. He says, look, if Elway stood down, he needs to let the new guy do his job and not stand in his way. Plain and simple. We have enough issues without the this is my word, power struggle. And I agree with you. If you're stepping down as GM, step down as GM. And I think, honestly, I really do. I think for the most part, that's what Elway plans to do. He emphasized today in that one-on-one with Kliss that he wants to be involved in the big decisions. So let's define what we can assume he means by the big decisions. Anything to do with quarterback, right? Drew Lock's future, the big A-list free agents like Justin Simmons, Shelby Harris, Von Miller. Obviously, that's a decision that is not just a fiscal decision or even a 2021 football decision. That's a legacy. That's an organizational decision that reverberates depending on what you do with Von. He's one of the all-time great Broncos ever. That's probably a decision that he would at least want to be consulted on. Doesn't mean he wants to come in and strong arm it his way, but he wants some input there, and just to have that be a part of the zeitgeist or whatever for the GM. What else? Maybe what you do in the first round. Other than that, Zach, I think Elway's hands off. And even in those scenarios that I just stipulated, I think it's if and only when the GM comes to him, and he's going to be working in tandem, this GM, with Fangio. Fangio's going to have a lot more say on things than he has in the last couple of years. But I think Elway's just kind of going to be there as the sounding board. He's just not doing a very good job, in my opinion, of communicating that as succinctly as he could in the court of public opinion.
I think just his machinations and his habits and what he's known for the last decade of being the Broncos GM, or most of the last decade, and he's just having to learn to transition away from that. It's like when we were in school, we had to write down the date and it was a new year. How often do we all, and I still do this now, I write the old, year for the first month of the new year. Elway has to learn he's not the GM anymore, and he has to unwire his brain to think that way. But to answer the question, I could see the old Elway, the prideful Elway, most of the stuff that has to do with his roster. He's leaving the new GM his baby, Chad. These are all the players that Elway brought into the building. It's like if you worked on a car and it was almost completed and you give it to somebody else. You step away from it, you're still kind of wondering what they're going to do to your car, what they're going to undo, what they're going to change, and you take that very personally. He spent years and blood and sweat building up this Broncos roster and this Broncos coaching staff, and it's tough. It's like watching someone date your ex. It's a weird feeling. It's a weird sight to see, and you have to kind of just learn to live with it. And enough time goes by, Chad, apathy kicks in, and once apathy kicks in for Elway, there's retirement.
Yeah, it's akin to someone coming in and dating your ex, and then stepping in and being dad of your kid, right? You're like, hey, dude, that's my job. What are you doing, dog?
Yes.
All right.
It's more apt.
We're here for the metaphors and analogies here.
I dropped like 4 there, but hopefully one caught on.
Well done. Kenneth Booker in the house. Good to see you, bro. He says, probably won't happen, but is Kubiak GM material?
No.
Well, Kub had, for what it's worth, I'm just going to get this out there so we have, the lay of the land. Kub has not only been a head coach for, dang near, how long was he in Houston? 7-8 years as head coach? Something like that. And then 2 more in Denver. Plus, he had the front office role in the scouting department as a special assistant or advisor, or whatever that title was, to Elway. He's got some qualifications to be considered, but that's more old guard. That's more old blood. And I get it that one of the models of success the Broncos have kind of had in their big moments is, when the band gets back together. So, Elway got to a Super Bowl or 3 in the 80s. His OC for at least a couple of those was Mike Shanahan, right? Then the band gets broken up. Shanahan goes off. He does his thing, ends up getting a job with the Raiders. That doesn't work, so he goes to the Niners. Finally, Pat Bowlen says, hey, I fired Wade Phillips. Mike, come be the guy. Gets reunited with Elway. The band's back together, and boom, off to the races, 2 Super Bowls. Then cut to 2015, or actually I'll date it a little bit further back, 2011. Broncos depredations post Josh McDaniels. It's at the time the lowest moment in franchise history. Pat Bowlen has the eureka moment. Let's get Elway back here and see if we can make some magic. Elway comes in, does a pretty good job, lands Peyton Manning, which is great. But the band came back together, so to speak. The familiar faces that have in the past influenced this thing in the best way, as far as, you look at the 3 world championships. One thing, I would say 3 things in common. Elway was involved in all 3 at some level, right? Kubiak was involved in all 3 at some level. And even though Mike Shanahan was not on staff for Super Bowl 50, I would contend that he had his fingerprints on Super Bowl 50 as well, because of his imprint and influence not only on Elway, but on Kubiak schematically and as a coach. I mean, everything Kubiak learned in terms of coaching, he learned from Mike Shanahan. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, Zach, to get to the point here. No, on Kub. I know that he's part of the old band, but the real magic here is that brought you those 3 Lombardis, the one common denominator that ultimately matters the most when you boil it all down, it's Elway.
Yes. And when he resigned, I mean, just to continue the timeline a little bit, when he resigned from the Broncos due to health concerns, a year later, I mean, reports were surfacing. He was itching to get back and he wants to be back in the game. And all this almost desperation feelers he was sending out to the NFL, to teams and to prospective suitors. He couldn't land a head coaching job. He had to settle for a coordinating job. So what would make anyone think he can leap from that to go into GM? I mean, he was a good head coach, maybe not great, and he's been a decent offensive mind. He did a lot of good with Kirk Cousins in Minnesota this year. I mean, Cousins and Justin Jefferson, that offense was pretty electric. GM, I can't see it, and I don't even think OC. He retired for good this time, Chad. I think he fulfilled his craving, he scratched that itch, and now time to enjoy retirement, just like Elway will next offseason.
Trying to real quick, the delay there. I'm trying to share this YouTube link on Facebook since we're not able to stream directly to our community there tonight. I feel a little bit guilty, so I hurried and shared the YouTube link for tonight's stream. But let's grab Levi. Good to see you, bro. One of our superstars who really came on strong. I want to say like late summer, something like that, and then he has a really cool job. Took him away from us for a while. Now he's back, and it's just been great having you back, Levi. But he says, hey, fellas, I want the GM to be hired already. I've been checking my phone every 15 minutes to see if they got hired yet. I know, man. It's I feel you on that because it feels like none of the other dominoes that need to fall, Zach, can fall until that gets resolved.
Yeah, and also the fact that Fontenot's still in the playoffs. I mean, Champ Kelly and George Paton can start right now. I mean, tomorrow, for lack of a better, realistic timeline. But Fontenot, per NFL rules, would have to wait until the Saints are eliminated to put pen to paper. But if he's the guy, he's the guy. And if this goes, Chad, past Wednesday or Thursday, I think that's an indication that Fontenot is the guy. Otherwise, what are you waiting for? They've had Zoom meetings. They're going to have at least one in-person interview. If we don't have an answer by Wednesday, which I think we will, I think it'll be Peyton as of right now, that could be an indication that they're leaning toward Terry down in New Orleans.
Yeah, I know that's another timeline that Kliss put out is he thinks by Wednesday there's probably going to be some kind of an answer and an announcement coming. So you can deduce a few things from that timeline he was given because I don't think he just pulls that out of his rear end. Like I think he was given that at some point along the line in the conversations. This is me making assumptions here, but trying to be Sherlock Holmes over here. But I think he was given that kind of a timeline and was planted for a reason. And what can you deduce from it? I'm not sure, but it probably points to George Paton because Terry Fontenot, even though everything I've heard is it's him and it comes down to him and Paton right now. Zach, he's in the playoffs. You can't get him at least another week. And who knows? You might not be able to get him till the second week of February after the Super Bowl because that could be the Saints' ultimate trajectory this year. Kenneth, again, jumping in. Good to see you, my friend, as always. He says, if the Broncos draft a quarterback, who would be the best fit at 9? Zach, I'm going to say removing Trevor Lawrence off the board, another Zach would be the best fit. But Lawrence, he's the dream, but he's off the table unless you're going to sell out the entire farm, and you got to convince number one to give that up. Nevertheless, I would probably have to say if you're hell bent to get a quarterback there, the best fit probably going to be Zach Wilson.
I said it yesterday, and I'll say it again. There's not, at least in my opinion, there's not much of a gap separating Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. There is a gap. But it's not as massive as some people would want you believe. He is easily, in my opinion, again, the quarterback 2 in this year's draft class. I really like him a lot as a prospect. He is so comfortable and so wise and mature beyond his years, so poised. He's a dual threat player. He steps up in big situations. Nothing rattles him. I mean, he is everything you want in a prospective franchise quarterback. If it's not lock in 2021, I'm crossing my fingers that it's Zach Wilson.
All right, we are at the 50-minute mark, and I kind of feel like I'm whistling past the graveyard a little bit here, being on a hotel Wi-Fi, so I don't want to push our luck too much. We're going to have to keep this one, pretty tight to the 1 hour mark. So as you guys know, we don't leave any superstar out in the cold when it comes to this podcast. Let's grab Levi. I appreciate you again, man. Thank you. He says, can they hire Fontenot while he's still in the playoffs, or do they have to wait? They do have to wait till the Saints get bounced. And the reason why is, it depends on that person's role specifically with the team. But one of Terry Fontenot and his contract, one of Terry Fontenot's responsibility is something Zach touched on a few minutes ago, which is it's called advanced scouting. And all that means is that Fontenot heads up the process of scouting the upcoming opponent. So that's crucial during the regular season, and it's even more so during the playoffs, obviously. So, the Saints, for the guy that's been spearheading that all year, oh, sorry, you just got a new job as the GM with another team. We get that, but we're not letting you leave till we're done here, basically. So that's the downside with Fontenot, is you're still waiting a little while.
It's a stupid rule, too. I mean, it's an archaic requirement or, prerequisite to hiring a new coach or GM, the waiting period. Yeah, he couldn't technically sign, but, there's always these underneath the table type deals, these wink agreements they can have in place. But I was going to say on the last question before this one about the GM hiring, you have to get the guy in the building now, Chad. I mean, scouting is coming up now. Free agency is coming up in a few months. We have the combine, whatever that's going on, maybe virtually. You have to get the guy in the building to start looking over the Broncos roster and instilling his vision for what he wants to do. The more time wasted is going to hurt Denver in the long term.
Jen Heckel jumping in, and Jen has become more and more active within the community over the last month or so, I would say, and it's been great getting to know you a little bit better, Jen, and we appreciate your support. She says, hey, guys, we've said all season, coaching. If the new GM can't touch coaching, will we still have a chance next season? This was something thank you, Jen, by the way, and she's using one of your catchphrases there, Zach. But this was something I kind of mulled over today on Twitter. I can't remember who it was. I was responding to a tweet on – oh, no, it was when Doug Peterson got fired. I quote tweeted something to the effect of, if you're going to blow it up, in terms of Vic Fangio doesn't get fired after 2 losing seasons to start his career. Doug Peterson, only, 3 years removed from hoisting the Lombardi and bringing Philadelphia their one and only Lombardi trophy, gets canned. And I'm not saying he wasn't deserving to get fired. Don't misunderstand, because it's been bad in Philly the last couple of years. But meanwhile, Vic Fangio gets a pass, and you're blowing up the front office. So, I wonder about the logic of the half measures. Half measures rarely prevailed, no matter what, the environment, the situation, no matter what it is. And so, and this was more me just kind of thinking out loud on Twitter. I wasn't necessarily advocating for Vic Fangio at all. That's not what I was saying, to lose his job. But I do wonder about that. And I think really what it comes down to is whoever gets the job, and it's probably going to be George Paton. I think the understanding is, hey, try to make it work with Vic. Let's give 2021 an honest effort. If it doesn't work, you'll handpick your guy in 2022.
Yes, 1,000%. That's what's going to happen. Fangio, for all intents and purposes, is a lame duck in 2021. He's coaching for his job pretty much like everybody else. I mean, not to mention McMahon shouldn't have a job right now. They should start, replacing some members of the coaching staff. But yes, it's all going to boil down to answer the question more directly, the Broncos will go next year as the offensive coaching goes, because we can assume with a healthy roster, Fangio's defense for the most part should be effective. It comes down to the offense and quarterbacking play. Can Pat Shurmur unlock Drew with no excuses, no pandemic, no lost preseason games, no injuries? It's going to come down to that. If they flounder, Chad, depending on who it is, I can see Fangio getting fired mid-season. If they start 0-5, 1-6, I can say, I'm saying, you know what, this is not my guy. I want to pick my guy. We're going to have an interim coach and then reboot in the offseason. So, yes, Fangio is a lame duck, and he is coaching for his job in 2021.
I'll tell you what, he can't survive another 0-4, 1-3 start next year. I really don't think so. I think they'll just pull the plug because, look at his record. The first 4 games of the season, the first quarter of the season, 0-4 in 2019, 1-3 in 2020. And it took a just really weird game and drawing the worst team in the league on your schedule this year in week 4, the Jets, to avoid starting 0-4 in back-to-back years. And again, that it just goes. There's so many mitigating factors. I get it, the outliers of the pandemic and all the injuries and just the weirdness of the season that was. But still, it's just hard to believe that if you're going to blow up GM and you're Joe Ellis and you say to yourself, look, time to make a change. We need new leadership, John, fade off into the background. But we're going to go ahead and keep Vic. I get it, the continuity key. You're hoping that continuity key unlocks something big in year 3 of the Fangio regime. I'm just not sure that if you're bringing in new blood in the front office, that's the right decision.
Chad, wager it real quick, because I think there's like a 75% chance the Broncos will have a new head coach in 22. I as much as I want to like Vic and his coaching staff and the current personnel, I really don't see him being the guy. And I want it to happen. I'm not saying it won't happen. It's way too premature. They don't even have a GM right now. I just happen to think there's a really, really positive chance they can have a new head man after this next season.
And for what it's worth, those of you who've been listening to the Huddle Up podcast for a while now, you can remember that it was Zach who was pounding the table for Vic before Vic was even on my radar. All right, as a head coaching candidate, right before the 2018 season ended. Zach was like, no, I'm not saying this to clown at all. I'm saying the reason I'm saying this is you liked him, you thought he'd be good, and so for you to say I have my doubts now 2 years in, that's you saying, look, I'm calling the spade a spade. It hasn't been what it should be, and it hasn't been anywhere as close. Now here's Naj. Good to see you, bro. By the way, are you on Twitter yet? Hey, brothers, hopeful for the offseason. I think the team has to focus on defense this year, locking up Shelby, replacing Josie Jewell, and rebuilding the secondary. Greatest concern,
yes,
Fangio, Sherman.
Exactly.
Thoughts?
Exactly. Yeah, we literally just talked about. Yeah, they have to determine, the defense, what they want to do there. I would cut Jarrell Casey. I would obviously pay Shelby Harris. I would resign Simmons. And yes, get a dynamic inside linebacker, obviously replenish the secondary. Naj, you're 1,000% spot on. A lot of this is common sense, but this cannot be an offseason minus what you want to do at quarterback devoted to offense. It has to be, regardless of GM, stockpiling the defense and getting that unit back to where they should be next season.
The Queen jumping in, showing some love at late here as we're about to sign off for the night. Appreciate you, Christy, and everything you do for us and for the community. We love you.
Yes.
I think that's it as far as supers, but here's one question I think is worth our time as we kind of sign off and wish you all a good evening and get back to fully focusing on the national championship game. Robert on YouTube, Caslow, says, would waiting for Terry Fontenot be worth waiting until February? So assuming, let's just say, for the sake of argument, the Saints go all the way to the Super Bowl. Is he a guy that you put everything on ice, you put everything on hold for? Let's say the decision is done today, Zach. Let's just say as an example, this is done. They haven't announced it yet, but he's agreed to terms. The Broncos want him, but they got to wait. Do you see him as being such a superior option in terms of Paton or Kelly that he'd be worth that wait in comparison to getting them boots on the ground right now?
See, that's my thing. There's no comparison between Fontenot and Kelly. No comparison at all. But Paton and Fontenot, though, the drop-off, if there is one, is negligible. And George Paton has some strong suits and more experience than Fontenot has in certain areas. God, that's a trick question. I love Fontenot a lot, and I think he is the best candidate, but to wait another 3 weeks, even with a deal in place, you're delaying what he wants to do in the building. He wants to have interviews with the players, Chad. He wants to get a feel for the organization, or even in, CV times right now. He has to get his vision set up. He has to take a look at the roster. I mean, he can't do this right now, focusing on the playoffs and the Saints, so he can't really wear two hats in that sense. I don't know. I don't know that I would wait that long with this offseason being so crucial to Denver and scouting coming up and the signing period coming up and all these different moves that has to be made. I don't know. As much as I like him, I don't know that I wait 3 weeks.
That's why I think the Broncos are going to hire George Paton because they just don't want to roll the dice on a undeterminable right now. That's not even a word, but an focused timeline on getting their GM. They know that he can start today. George Paton. By the way, Manny, we love you. Manny's one of our longtime listeners, a superstar, been with us forever. This is like something I would say about Ohio State. He says, no good quarterback has come out of BYU. Look it up. Let me just list a few. Let's see. Hall of Famer Steve Young. All right, there's one. I don't know. Ty Detmer won a Heisman but sucked in the league, right? I'm trying to think after that. Well, Jim McMahon.
I mean, there's been Kellen Moore. He was pretty good, at least in college.
But he was Boise State.
Oh, that's right. I got
Brigham
confused.
Young,
Yeah. My fault.
Jim McMahon won a Super Bowl winning quarterback from BYU. Lately, though, you're right in terms of they haven't had any big NFL studs. So, Taysom Hill, I guess you could throw him in there, but he's not there quite yet as a bona fide signal caller in the league. But BYU used to be known, Manny. Maybe I'm a little bit older than you, and so my reckoning goes back a little farther on this. But BYU used to be considered a quarterback factory. All right, they did a great job under Lavelle Edwards back in the day, recruiting, cultivating top of the line quarterback talent, and that bloom has kind of faded off that rose of late. But Zach Wilson could be the guy to kind of get him back on the map.
I mean, I understand the whole thing about Ohio State quarterbacks. Not to sound hypocritical, but what was Tony Romo's school? What was it? North Dakota State Technical College? Like, sometimes it doesn't matter what college they go to. It matters of what the player can do. And in this day and age, I'm not writing anyone off, Fields included. If they couldn't be a good option for the Broncos, it's just my preference. I happen to think Zach Wilson is better quarterback in this draft class than Lance or than Fields, and he's not much further behind than Trevor Lawrence.
Wasn't it Illinois State? I know you were making a joke about Tony Romo, but I want to say Illinois State or Illinois something, and him, Garoppolo, and Sean Payton are the three quarterbacks to come out of that school. Someone fact
Eastern Illinois. Right.
Eastern Illinois. There we go. There it is. Charlie Beagle. Appreciate you, bro. All right, guys. We got a dip. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for spending some time with us here tonight. Sorry, Facebook, for whatever reason, we couldn't get you connected tonight. So I don't know what it is. We'll look at it on the back end when it's all said and done. But mile high salute to our Super Chat superstars. Love you guys. Really appreciate you so much. Before we get out of here, though, real quick, I want to remind you to connect with us on Twitter. This is for everybody. When we focus it on the superstars, but we want all of you to connect with us on Twitter. For superstars, we like to be able to tag you and shout you out after each show. So find us on Twitter at HuddleUpPod, also at Mile High Huddle. My partner, Zack Kelberman, at Kelberman NFL. Myself, at Chad and Jensen. And not to beat you guys over the head too much or flog a dead horse or whatever, but I know the questions are going to come again tonight as soon as I get off this stream. So I want to remind everybody, here's how you become a supporter on Facebook of MHH and get access to Kelberman's Corner on Sunday. You go to our page, just open up the app on your phone, or if you're online, go to facebook.com/Mile High Huddle. You'll see the big blue button that says become a supporter. You click that, you follow the steps, you're in, and you'll get access immediately to Kelberman's Corner from Sunday that you have missed up to this point, plus all the coming content in the future. And we have a lot more in terms of new shows and content coming down the pike that's going to be catered to that official supporter group there on Facebook. So appreciate that. And Zach, we're off tomorrow, so have a great start to your week, bro. And we'll circle back Wednesday, and we'll have John back then, by the way.
Yes.
He'll be back from vacation, so sign us off, bro.
Band's ending back together. And real quick, anyone for the next Kelberman's Corner, we might be, hint, doing something about Fangio's coaching staff or, the lack of attention to it or alteration to it. So anyone who has gripes about that in terms of someone named Tom McMahon might want to tune into that. It's worth it. I promise you. I'll make it worth your while. And Dylan jumping in last minute chat. Dylan with the $5 super chat. So on point with what he's saying here. Scout the player, not the school. You're right. Even with Fields, Chad, we have to be more cognizant of that. Is not writing him off because of Ohio State, but I like Zach Wilson a lot. Dylan, you're correct. Thank you so much. We will see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good week. Hopefully by then, or maybe by then, have a new general manager. Should have an update. Talk to you guys then. And as always, go Broncos.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.